to Exit Only Theater Podcast. I'm JP Lee, and sitting in front of me is...
Jesus.
Okay, no, that's not what I was expecting. I don't know how to have this conversation with you.
No, this is Adrian Alderete. Welcome back, you guys. We're back to having kind of a normal show today.
Yeah, it's a traditional review episode.
We are doing a review
of a film that we may or may not have been excited to see in the first place.
Yeah.
Southpaw.
Yep.
The Jake Gyllenhaal vehicle. I think the best way to get started with this is just to kind of give a quick synopsis of what this film is about. We like to say if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the movie.
You've seen it all. Yeah, like, honestly, it's, like, when you watch the trailer for this, and it's everywhere now. Like, you watch ESPN or something like that, it's everywhere. That being said, when you watch it, you're going to get, you know, kind of your run-of-the-mill boxing movie. Yeah. So, go ahead. Spit that synopsis, son.
Here's the Rotten Tomatoes synopsis, and I think it's kind, if you will. Yeah. All right. From acclaimed director Antoine Fuqua and screenwriters Kurt Sutter and Richard Wenk, who did Sons of Anarchy and The Mechanic, so acclaimed, sure, if you want to go that way.
He has credits.
Some people really like Sons of Anarchy, so I won't crap on that. But Southpaw tells the riveting story of Billy the Great Hope, reigning junior middleweight boxing champion of the world. Nominee Jake Gyllenhaal, of course. And it's basically the story of him, his downfall, his rise, and his redemption. So I'm not going to go into the rest of this because we're going to jump into just what was the overall impression of the film right after we saw it and now that you've slept on it for 12 hours.
Initial thoughts, like, did you like it? Did you not like it?
Exactly. For me, I'll kick it off by saying I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where for the most part, it hits notes that it's supposed to hit, and I felt things I was supposed to feel, which in some cases is enough for a movie for me, but in this case, I didn't feel as though, I felt the feelings I felt were manipulated, if that makes sense. Yeah. So my overall reaction is I did not like it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna hold back. It was a huge disappointment for me. Not because I had big expectations, was because I was expecting it to be a run-of-the-mill boxing story, and it didn't even do that.
Even that felt
short. It was really... It was disappointing because you have, like, everybody recently has dubbed Matthew McConaughey's resurgence as the McConaissance, and Gyllenhaal's kind of having a similar thing when you obviously, like, when you go back from, like, let's say The Prisoners, and then you had Nightcrawler, and then like now this was like the one movie where it's like, hey, we're gonna follow him around.
It's his vehicle,
yeah, where you're gonna see a really interesting character arc from like rise, fall, rise, and they wasted like this like. It was wasted. And he physically transformed into this role. Obviously, like any boxing movie, any actor that has to become physically fit, like there's a point to it. And he's like a smart enough actor now where it's like, I'm not just going to be buff or cut up to be cut up. Right. It's like there's going to be points to this. And in this movie, everything he did, they kind of just sucked the soul out of it.
He gets credit for the work he put in leading up to the film. What he does in the film works for the most part. I think sometimes the mumbling is a little excessive. Like
I didn't mind that. No.
90% of the time, I liked his accent. 10% of the time, there would be moments where I was like, he's not really doing an accent. He's really just kind of mumbling. And it works. It works. The character is he's not put together at times like he's supposed to be falling apart, and it works. It's the same problem I had in Nightcrawler, where Nightcrawler is an exponentially better film. Do not get it twisted. Like, I'm not trying to say that Nightcrawler and Southpaw are anywhere near each other in terms of caliber of film, but the way that you're almost distracted by the fact that Gyllenhaal is good it's a similar reaction. It's just there's moments he's so strong that you're like, oh, I'm watching Jake be really good, and it's I don't know, it's not his fault in this movie.
Yeah, like just from like the performance, breaking that down, I could agree with you where you watch something like this where you could tell an actor's acting to get an award nomination. Yeah. And I feel with this, obviously when you watch any physical transformation of a movie, and he did that with Nightcrawler too, where he got super skinny. You're like, oh, okay. You know,
and to do that back to back is pretty impressive.
It's pretty impressive. He went Christian Bale on us, and it was cool. But I feel frustrated because, and I'll get into this when I give my formal like all like encompassing review for the film, and it's the director's fault. And I usually never say that because I know how hard it is to put together a product that not only makes sense, but also tries to like leave you with something to think about when you leave the theater. Right. But the only thing I left while thinking about the theater was like, I wonder who texted me during the entire movie because I did not give a shit about this movie. I feel bad for Gyllenhaal because he's obviously taking very careful a very careful approach to picking his projects now, where he's like he wants to be considered a serious actor, and this one is like a major bump in the road because he doesn't. I saw in an interview recently. He only picks certain movies to work on. He doesn't pick a lot of them anymore. He only does like he studies for one film for I think like 4 months. So when you prepare that much for a role, so that means you're probably only in 2 movies a year. And you miss on one, payout. You're like, man, dude, like Antoine Fuqua, man, you Fuqua'd up, man, like seriously.
He has that written down by the
But no, like go ahead, like, I'm gonna completely hand it off to you. What's your now that we got past Gyllenhaal, what's your like review of the actual film?
As a film, you said Fuqua I think is the biggest culprit for why it doesn't work. I personally have a huge problem with the editing. Yeah. I think that's something that I noticed first and then kind of worked my way through a movie. And I think it has to do with the fact that, and I've forgive me for not recognizing how to pronounce his name, but John Rafua, again, forgive me. He's the editor of the film. His experience in other films is primarily either fast-paced comedies that may or may not work, like Balls of Fury, or a film like Olympus Has Fallen or The Equalizer, which I've heard good things about. Those films, for the most part, require a fast-paced, tension-filled kind of editing, which works for the boxing scenes. The boxing scenes are not perfect, but they're well enough done that you are like, all right, I feel like I'm in the ring. They do a lot of point-of-view stuff that's a la Raging Bull, where you just feel the glove coming at you. And it was so obvious. Yeah. Those things, from an editing perspective, were done well enough, but he transferred that style into almost every scene. And you're sitting there, and the tension is not in the performances, which are solid enough. Forrest Whitaker is good. Jake Gyllenhaal, like we'd already talked about, is solid. Everybody's sewed up. The girl who plays his daughter is really good. Amazing. I think their relationship saves a lot of what doesn't work in the movie. But the editing, to me, is what makes the film, it's disjointed. It doesn't know what tone it needs in certain scenes where you might need to stick on a performance for 30 to 40 seconds, and you need to not be afraid to do that. And that's joint. That's the editor's role to make that decision, but it's also Fuqua to watch it and say, you know what, we need to do that. And that to me was the most egregious thing. The writing is a little heavy-handed, but the editing to me is the most egregious error of this movie. So.
All right, like for me, like, and this is the thing, like I like to fancy myself a director. But I don't want to be one of those like film school snobs where like, oh man, that was really bad.
No, but you can see the vision of what it takes to make a movie. Yeah,
like when you work on enough stuff, when you break down something you don't like, and you could tell like when you see like a shot selection or what they choose to use, like what they choose to like, not so much like the shot itself, it's what they chose to capture. Right. For me, the film doesn't capture the soul that you would expect from a character analysis of a film. Because this film is a total character analysis. It's supposed to be. Right. Like, you as a viewer are supposed to be taken on a ride with Gyllenhaal. So you're supposed to witness the intimate turns in his life. You know, you're supposed to see and experience the pain with him. Right. But instead we're taken away from that. Rather than letting those emotionally heavy moments just like play out, the director Antoine Fuqua chose to keep cutting from angle to angle, and it's like there was a joke that I remember from like Conan O'Brien years ago before he was on the Tonight Shows when he still had his own show, and it was a skit, and it was called the Too Many Cameras channel, where they're filming like this emotionally intense scene, but like you could tell they were like they had a camera, like they had a camera on the slippers, they had a camera. It was like someone on a deathbed, and like he's about to die, and then like the wife's over him like on the bed, is like, is there anything else that you want? But they're like, instead of capturing the moment, they're like, we have a camera in the shower, we have a camera, we have the GoPro camera, then we switch to the other camera. That's what this felt like. It's like, hey man, let's put a camera everywhere, and then like you said too, and I think you nailed it. They cut everything like a fight scene, where it was so fast paced. It was really distracting. Like I remember I looked at you, and I remember when we were sitting, and I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah. There was a scene like. And this is a spoiler where Forrest Whitaker he runs this gym in like the inner city where there's a lot of guys.
This could have been the best scene of the movie.
Yeah, and like Forrest Whitaker runs this gym in a really rough neighborhood where he's trying to raise these kids right that aren't getting raised right at home. And Gyllenhaal comes in to train, and he sees Forrest Whitaker hitting the punching bag like really hard. And Gyllenhaal's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "Dude, one of the kids died. He got shot." And you're like, holy crap. And Forrest Whitaker like breaks down and he's like pissed. So they sit down at ringside and they're talking to each other. And you're like, oh man, this is a really good moment. Like Gyllenhaal is going to use this as let it ride. Like for the character, there was a lot riding on that interaction, and instead they cut to a close up of Forrest Whitaker. Then they cut to a shot behind both of them from behind the ring from far away. Then they cut back and it's just Gyllenhaal, and then they cut back and they're facing him, and I'm like, whoa,
you're like, slow down, and there's no reason for it.
No. Like this is the thing when you capture stuff like when you're capturing a performance. Like, for instance, the film that I love citing when it comes to capturing emotional and physical pain at the same time is The Wrestler from Darren Aronofsky. The one with Mickey Rourke.
Yep.
Like, that one preaches patience. And it's all handheld. So it's like, yeah, the camera's going to be moving, but you're just letting the actor act throughout the scene instead of letting the editor cut it up for you.
That's the difference, is when you're doing Steadicam and you're doing it well, you know that the shakiness of that camera, the unpredictability of that movement is enough tension. You do not need to cut away from that. Yeah. To do that on top of edit jumps, it takes the entire scene and you're taken completely out of it, and it ruins it. And those two actors in this scene are too talented for that. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It's bad. And when the funny thing is, like, when you watch this, Antoine Fuqua has been in the game for a while. Yeah, he doesn't have like a major
he's
credit.
Not a rookie.
No, like his biggest credit is directing Training Day. Outstanding movie. And he obviously, when you watch that, it's shocking to me when you see the mistakes that he makes. In that movie, for instance, like when he's like, when Denzel Washington's character in Training Day has the scene where he's like, King Kong has nothing on me.
Right.
The camera's just moving around and it stays on him where like Denzel Washington's character is looking around, he's desperate, he's looking around. They never cut from that. And then you watch this movie, he's cutting everywhere.
Completely different.
And I'm just like, I'm thinking, and yeah, you made the point, like, it's a completely different editor, but at the same time, like, as a director, you're like, you're in the edit room.
You know what works.
You're in the edit room, so, like, when you're in the edit room editing your movie, the editor's at the computer, and you literally sit behind them. Like, you and I do this all the time, and, like, when you're, like, there have been times where, like, you made a cut or something like that, it's like, hey, what do you think about this?
It's collaborative. There should be feedback back and forth.
Yeah, so, like, and I would tell you, I'm like, you know what, let's try it like this, because I think it would work better. And at the end of the day, you're going to meet at the middle because you're both trying to get the right project.
Exactly.
This one, I feel like Fuqua was like, you know what, man, I trust this editor. I'm going to go home.
Right.
Yeah, and I was just like, he doesn't let the scenes evolve. He'd rather just cut it up together. That's not capturing drama. That's capturing action.
And there's another scene that happens where, and slight spoiler alert again, they're visiting the grave of someone important in the film. Yeah. And for a scene like that, you've seen, graveyard scenes that are emotional that kind of play off of just the sadness of what's going on, but it felt like there was a coverage problem. Like there was a moment where you see...
And break down what coverage is, because a lot of people actually don't know what that is. Yeah.
So a lot of films, for the most part, if they're done well, in pre-production, they're storyboarded to allow for shots of the actors performing. So if you're doing two people talking, you want to make sure that you have quote-unquote coverage of one person's performance. Then they'll go back. The person who was on camera before is now having the over-the-shoulder shot, and they're going to redo the scene again so that the other person now is on camera. Sometimes they'll do multicams to be more realistic and have live acting, which is kind of cool, so it makes the editor's job a lot easier.
Yeah, but that's very unheard of, but I just wanted to say that.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, that's almost like a TV multicam kind of style.
Sitcom.
Exactly. But in this case, like, it felt like they either skipped some of that in some scenes, and, like, a lot of the times, all the coverage they had were two shots. So, like, there would be moments where the little girl, who's incredible in the movie for the most part, she has a very emotional moment, and then instead of cutting to, like, his reaction to her, because it's really about him recognizing what she needs, it's not about him at that point, it doesn't cut to him, it cuts to just another wider shot of them embracing, and you're like, okay, well, this was a very tender moment, and you just zoomed me out, and then they brought it back in. It just, there was a lack of intent with the shot selection and the editing choices that just took me out of about half, if not more, of every scene. And
the one thing that, like, to point out too, that we're reiterating is how hard it is to make not only just a good film, but a film that wants to address what you want to address from emotional level and from a subtextual level, if that's a word.
Yeah, I'll take it.
And that's the thing, like, it's such a collaborative process where you have to think about, like, am I picking a good editor? Because you could sit there and say, yeah, Steven Spielberg's putting together all this stuff. I don't have the facts in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he picks editors that he trusts. He goes through, he's like...
Tarantino, they all have a team. They work specifically with someone that they trust with their vision.
And, like, this guy... at the end of the day, in my opinion, it falls on the shoulders of the director. And it's like, you hate to do it, but like, it's like, imagine a football coach. It's like, let's say you lose the Super Bowl like Pete Carroll did. Oh, it's all his fault. It's like, yeah, but he also got you to the Super Bowl.
He also gets all the credit for, if you win, you get the credit. You should take the responsibility of losing.
Exactly. And in this case, you wasted amazing performances by everybody. Rachel McAdams, all this stuff. Very good stuff. You Solid didn't. Work. The entire movie felt like he never shot a drama before. Where it felt like his first film, and that it's not fair because I know he's much better than that. And also, just side note, 50 Cent should not have been in that movie. Yeah, 50 Cent was kind of stupid. His character, like, this is the thing. It's one thing if 50 Cent's bad. It's another thing if the character's also very stupid. His character was like, I get contrived. Why he's there. Every scene was contrived. Yeah, and it was so silly. I just thought, man, we just could not review this movie and not point that out. It's disappointing because you watch like fighting movies have gotten better recently. Yeah, like not so much original, but they've gotten better. I think they're getting to the point now where we're getting, because the fight movie, the boxing movie is such a classic genre to tackle. It's like a Western. Where it's not just a sports film. There's a lot more going on. You're obviously, everybody's going to compare everything to Rocky or Raging Bull because those are two very different stories. Rocky's like the person who comes from nothing and becomes something, and then Raging Bull is kind of capturing the destruction, the falling apart of a fighter, which to me is a little bit more compelling, but that's just because it's my favorite boxing. And I think you can meet at the middle for a lot of those. And Rocky, I think, balances that. Like, as much as cheesy as the rest of those films are, as a whole, franchise. Yeah, as a franchise, some of them are very silly, but they're always effective because they know what they're good at. Yeah. This one, like for me, like for instance, like the classic stuff from from any fight movie, the training montage. Yeah. This one was so garbage because like the second you've seen the trailer, the Eminem song Phenomenal, and I'm like the second that start, it was so abrupt. Like you're there in the moment, all of a sudden. Phenomenal! Yeah, and I'm like, a gratuitous shot of him standing in front of the mirror on top. It's just, It wasn't, and there was no point to aside from like, really hey, check out how good he looks. And the montage itself, like there was one part that I wish they would have expanded on because I've never seen it in a film from a boxing film. What was that? Was because they had that famous boxer, what's his first name? Ortiz. I don't remember his first name. I always know. I'm looking it up as I go, but yeah, like. There's this I don't know if he's retired. I think he's still fighting. Yeah, he's still currently. He's a professional boxer. He was in Expendables 3, and like they show Gyllenhaal in the ring, and like Forrest Whitaker tells him, "Hey, you're gonna go in the ring. You're gonna spar, but you're not gonna throw a punch. You're just gonna learn defense." And like he's like, wait, I can't. Victor Ortiz, that's who he is. Yeah, Victor, that's right. And he's like, you're not gonna throw a punch. He's like, oh, okay. He's like, well, what am I supposed to do? He's like, you're just gonna learn defense. You're gonna learn how to Mayweather, basically, like you said. Yeah, exactly. I remember you said that in the middle of the movie. And then who comes out? Victor Ortiz, a legit boxer. And like he's like, hey, he's not gonna throw a punch. Just go after him. And he's like, oh, okay. And he goes after him. He's throwing legit punches, and then they cut away. I'm like, personally, for me, I'm like, that's a sequence in a boxing movie I've never seen before. It's one of the most compelling boxing sequences in the entire movie because it was the most realistic. And it was like 4 seconds. Yeah, they let it go. And they let it go because the reason I wanted to see that was because... First of all, Victor Ortiz is a real boxer. Yeah. Some people might not know that going in because he doesn't play a real boxer. Yeah. And Gyllenhaal had to, like, obviously, like any person that tries to do a boxing movie, you have to pretty much become a legit boxer to sell it. And Gyllenhaal did become almost a legit boxer. There's a lot of tools. I would have loved to have seen him actually struggle against him and like just play into that, even if it was like not meant to be in the film. Where he's like, "Hey, hey, can we just hold up for a second? Let's leave that in the film." Right. Like that's actually kind of cool. Like go off the cuff and like I remember I made the example to you. If you remember from The Dark Knight Rises, like when Batman comes back and like he's fighting Bane after he busted like one of like the pipes in his mask, where Bane's just going crazy, and they hold on that shot where he's just punching Batman from side to side, and like you can tell like they're physically real punches, and he's throwing him around. That I'm like, that's jarring as a viewer. I'm like, holy crap, that looks really cool. Absolutely. If I saw Victor Ortiz doing that to Gyllenhaal for like say hold it for 10 seconds, I would be like, man, that's really cool. That's a legit boxer beating the crap out of Gyllenhaal. And that would have been twice as long as what they had. And even for the purpose of the story, like, yeah, it would have been awesome to see Gyllenhaal in the ring with a real fighter, just on its face. Yeah. But the other side of it is that the whole point of this film, I think, is
Gyllenhaal has to learn that aggression is not always the way to attack a situation. Mm-hmm. It's what gets his wife killed. It's what essentially almost kills his career just because he was getting himself beat up just so that he can come back to win these fights. Yeah. They could have portrayed a microcosm of that in that sequence and had him, get kind of upset at himself getting hit and play off of him kind of starting to get upset and have Forrest Whitaker say, like, no, you need to fight that urge. They don't do that. It doesn't develop. It just is like, he's angry. Then he learns defense. And then at the end of the last fight of the film, they show one moment of him losing his cool. Yeah. Like, they could have had that built up more. That's the whole tension of the film, is him learning to control himself. Yeah. And
that's, I think, just to sum up, like, I think both of our points are pretty much the same. Yeah. Where they just did a terrible job making this film intimate. It was
close-ups do not mean intimacy.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Like they could have done such a better job. I blame the director. You blame the editor.
It's definitely a little bit of both.
I blame the production. At the end of the day, the studio, not the studio, but Gyllenhaal's the only one that loses in all this because Fuqua, he's doing whatever he's doing. He's always going to make his style of action films like Equalizer and all that.
He'll go back to what he wants. Yeah.
You wasted like all this training,
solid performance,
and you did him wrong. And I feel it's bad enough to say it. To me, it's one thing if you make a bad movie, but like when you waste a good performance as an actor, I'm like, I'll never trust you again. I will never trust you again.
That's exactly, and that's something, just to summarize, Wesley Morris from Grantland had a perfect line about it. He says, the trouble with how hard Gyllenhaal goes in Southpaw is that he's in the service of weak material, so you notice the effort. Yeah. And that is exactly what's wrong with this film. There are good moments, but overall, it doesn't come together.
It's so bad. But, like, no, that being said, like, this is an interesting conversation that we had the other day, and we're like, you know what, let's save it for the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, like we said before, the boxing genre is such a classic genre in film, but at the same time, you can recognize there's a formula to it. Yep. So if we pose the question to ourselves, if we were to make a boxing movie, how would we, one, make it unique, or just in general, two, how would you make it good? I'm interested in getting your take, because we're both, obviously, being Latino, you grow up watching boxing no matter what.
That's true.
It's like a go-to thing. I'm being Mexican, being Cuban. It's a big deal everywhere.
They're big in both countries. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's actually a really good, interesting way to start the conversation, because I read a review, and I don't know if I agree or disagree with it, but I read a review that I couldn't not see the film through this lens. Is that you notice every other important character in this film that's not in his family is an African American actor or actress. Yeah. And it felt like the film, according to this critic, that this film could have benefited from having a minority lead. Yeah. And I don't always see that lens. I don't, for the most part, I don't necessarily understand whether or not that works or whether or not that's important to bring up. But
if it works, it ends up working.
Yeah, true. And if it doesn't work, then you notice it, and it could go either way. But at the same time, I think that this film could have benefited from having, and this is maybe why Creed could work really well, is that boxing now is much more popular with African American and Latino communities. Yeah. And I feel like, just on its face, when you watch boxing on ESPN, on HBO, the audiences and the people in the ring you identify with as these. I think it's the American story now. The common American story is that there is an influx of minorities who are adopting that, coming from nothing and building themselves up. Yeah. And that's, I think the film could have benefited from. I think not this film particularly, but I think it could be really cool to see a film like that. Yeah. That works off of that angle as opposed to the traditional, like, Cinderella Man, Raging Bull. I mean,
there are many there's a lot of ways you could go with it. Like, I'm glad you brought up Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe.
It's a great film
because you could tell that story now, it's really, you could knock it out of the park. Personally, like, I referenced the wrestler earlier. Yeah. The one thing I've always been fascinated at was how, and this movie almost hinted at it. Like, after the opening scene, I believe, is Gyllenhaal in a fight. He wins this fight against, like, a tough opponent. Right. Gets beat up and he wins. He goes straight to the locker room and he's sitting there. He's bleeding out. He's in a lot of pain. Yep. For me, I want to see that. I want to, like, the things that fascinate me are, like, the toll that it takes to be a champion. Because everybody is like, the training to be a champion, that's cool. I want to see the price you pay to be a champion.
And I think that's the most effective, one of the most effective moments between him and Rachel McAdams. She's not even in the scene. She leaves the Post-it for him on the window, on the mirror, and it says, imagine how the other guy feels.
Yeah.
Because she knows that the next morning is when he's going to feel his worst.
Yeah.
And you see him standing there, and he's just looking at himself falling apart. I think that's such a good moment, and that's something that people can really capitalize on in another film.
And, like, the one thing, like, the one kind of movie I've always wanted to see, and it's specifically, it's funny that I referenced The Wrestler, and I'm about to reference Black Swan, because they're both directed by the same guy, Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah.
The kind of movie that I would like to see is, like, the reality of what it takes to be the kind of, like, Michael Jordan-ish, Floyd Mayweather type of champion. Yeah. Where the sacrifice, like, the almost insane sacrifice, where it's almost, like, unethical, where it takes so much of a toll on you, especially if you're not necessarily, like, born with the great gifts. I want to see a movie where someone has to, like, really take it upon themselves to change who they are. Where you have to go, like, if you remember Black Swan, Natalie Portman's character goes crazy. I want to see something like that for a boxing film.
Because you don't necessarily need your main character to be a protagonist. You might want the line to be blurred and be like, they're succeeding and I'm not sure if I like that.
Yeah, and
how they're doing it.
Like, if there was a certain kind of director that I would like to see take on something like that, with that kind of visual and, like, maybe on that really dark undertone, would be someone like Nicholas Winding Refn. Yeah. Like, if you've seen Bronson, or if you've seen...
He can be brutal.
He can be really brutal, or If Only God Forgives. Like, movies like that, I'm like, the way he shoots it, where they're actually
stunning,
very stunning, but like, they're very also intimate. Like, when you watch Bronson, you're really kind of taken aback. You're kind of with your mouth open the entire time, because you're seeing this character kind of, like, not necessarily evolve, but you just see him live throughout, and you're just like, this guy is going to be the same way no matter what.
Yeah, and he portrays like a caged animal, and he just leaves the camera.
So imagine seeing something like a boxing movie where a guy has to or a guy or girl has to physically change and mentally change who they are to kind of have their dreams, like, realized. And I think that's something where it takes a dark turn. We always see, like, someone's like, I'm going to commit, I'm going to change my life. It's like, you know what? What if there's a negative side to that?
Yeah, what if not everyone's going to support you? What if you lose people along the way? Or...
And it's like, no, but, like, not only that, like, but, like, what if they totally, like, they grow to be fine with that? Like, I don't need anybody. Like, the Michael Jordan kind of, like, mentality. Everybody always, like, when people say, Michael Jordan's the greatest, he was the hardest worker. Yeah, but none of his teammates liked him. Like, he physically fought, like there's stories. He fought Steve Kerr. Fought members of the Dream Team, and it's to the point because he's so competitive and he wants to be the greatest of all time that he alienates everyone, and there's a price you pay to that. And I've always been fascinated with that.
That's actually a really good point. When arrogance becomes your prime personality trait, it reminds me of how they attack Whiplash. Like, Whiplash is a very similar film. Where, like,
that's a very good point.
Miles Teller becomes unlikable at some point, and that would be great as a boxing film.
I would love to see that, and kind of have, like, those... To have, like, the I guess the capacity to use visuals, kind of like in Bronson, or even like his other movie, Valhalla Rising, where he creates really weird visuals, but they're psychological, so you understand, like,
there's an intention.
And it's
not spelled out for you.
I would love to see something like that, where when a boxing movie where it's really dark, on, like, it would be a complete turn from something like Raging Bull or something like that. Where for me, that's what I think where the boxing genre should go. And sports genres should go, because it's not so much about, you're overcoming stuff. It's like, what if you overcome stuff, but there's at the sacrifice of who you are as a human being.
No, I love that, the psychological side of it, and even something as
Don't steal my idea.
Yeah, no, seriously, we're gonna write it. I'm still writing it. He's writing it now. No, but even a subtle thing like Friday Night Lights, where the endings aren't happy. You're not being built up to just have the gratuitous emotional qualities of normal boxing films. I don't need that anymore. I don't think we as a culture need that anymore.
We don't need to see someone be a champion anymore. I think it's more about, one, what does it take to be a champion? Because obviously, at the end of the day, a boxing movie is always going to answer what the person's either fighting for or what they are fighting.
And it has to be more than just what's in the ring.
Yeah, exactly. So, in sum, that's what I think a boxing movie should be. Overall, I would say Southpaw, huge disappointment. I give it, like, I'm not going to say, it's a 9.5 or something like that. I always say that. No. I say it's a bad movie. Don't watch it.
I say it's the Freedom Writers of boxing movies. It's emotionally, it's there. It's not a true story, so it's less convincing. But it follows the rules of the genre that you need it to be, but it's not compelling.
Yeah. It's whack.
And there are several reasons why.
Yeah, as in the Oxford Dictionary, aka it is whack.
It is.
So that's my review of the movie. That's the JP Lee's review of the movie.
Yep. And we're Exit Only Theater, and we'll see you when the credits roll.
Random sound.
Just drop pots and
Oh!